Hello everyone and welcome back. In this new lesson we're going to finish the implementation of the loading service by providing you with a slightly more convenient API that will help us to turn on and off the loading indicator. So I'm talking about the show loader until completed method. Before implementing it, let's see how this API compares with the direct use of loading on and loading off. So here in our home component, we were turning the loading indicator on at the beginning of reload courses, and we were turning it off whenever this observable here either completes or errors out. Now let's see what this would look like if we would not be using this API. So let's start by removing here loading on, and let's remove here the use of the finalize operator. With this, we now have the original definition of our courses observable, which had no loading indicator capabilities. So how are we going to add back those capabilities using the show loader until completed method? Well, we are going to take this observable that we have defined here, and we are going to call the loading service, and we are going to call the show loader until completed method. Now, this method takes as input argument an observable. We want to pass to this method the observable to which we want to add loading indicator capabilities. So in this case, the courses observable. What we are going to get back here from the show loader until completed method is going to be a new observable that I'm going to call the load courses observable. Now, this observable has loading indicator capabilities, meaning that at the beginning of the observable lifecycle, we are going to be turning on the loading indicator, and when the courses observable either completes or errors out, we are going to turn off the loading indicator. So it's this new observable with loading capabilities that we want to pass on to the rest of the application. Let's then use it here in order to define the beginner and the advanced courses. As we can see, this API is slightly more convenient, it's less invasive, we don't have here new operators such as the finalize operator added here to the definition of our courses observable. So let's now see how can we implement the show loader until completed method. Let's start by removing here this default implementation. Now, the first thing that we want to do here, while the observable that we have received here as an input does not initiate its lifecycle, is to create here another initial observable that is going to emit a value. That value is going to be used to trigger the loading indicator. In order to create our initial observable, we are going to use the RxJS factory method of that we are going to add here to our import statement, and we're going to use it to create an observable that is going to emit only one value, which is going to be the value null, and then this observable is going to complete immediately. Now, why is this initial value useful? When we receive this initial value, we are going to use the tap operator that we have introduced before in order to trigger a side effect. That side effect, as you are probably already imagining, will be to trigger the loading indicator. So we're going to call here loading on, and this is going to show the loading indicator to the user. Now, once this initial value gets emitted and the loading indicator is on, now what we want to do is to have this observable that we are creating here, that we are going to return as the output of show loader until completed. We want this observable to now to start emit the values emitted by the input observable. In order to switch from the values emitted by this initial observable and the values emitted by the input observable, I'm going to be using a higher order mapping operator. I'm going to be using, for example, concat map. Concat map is going to take the values emitted by the source observable, in this case this observable here, which only emitted the value null and then it completed immediately, and concat map is going to transform this value into a new observable, which is going to be our input observable. This means that the values emitted by the result observable are going to be identical to the values emitted by the input observable, with the exception that the loading indicator has already been turned on. Now, when this input observable completes or errors out, we're going to be turning off the loading observable. We want to be able to turn off then the loading indicator. So again, we're going to be using here the RxJS finalize operator in order to get notified that our observable has ended its life cycle. And we are going to be calling here the loading off method. And this is going to turn off the loading indicator. There is a lot going on in this simple implementation, so let's review it quickly. We have started here by creating a default observable just in order to be able to create an observable chain. When we receive this initial value, we start by turning on the loading indicator and we switch to outputting the values emitted by the input observable, and we do so using the concat map operator. When the input observable stops emitting any values and completes, we are going to be finalizing also our observable chain, and we are going to be turning the loading indicator off. The main advantage of this design with this off null source observable is that the loading indicator will only be turned on when the resulting observable returned by showLoader until completed is subscribed to. This means that the loading indicator is going to be shown or hidden in a way that is completely linked to the life cycle of the returned observable. Only when the returned observable gets subscribed to will the loading indicator become on, and only when the returned observable finishes its life cycle will the loading indicator be turned off. Notice that this method takes here a parametric type t, but we don't even have to specify it explicitly whenever we are calling here showLoader until completed. In the case, for example, of our home component, we have simply passed in here the courses observable, which is of type observable of course array, meaning that it emits values which are arrays of courses, and we didn't have to add here the parametric type course array in order to tell to the implementation of showLoader until completed that our observable emits arrays of courses. Instead, we can omit this parameter, and the implementation of our method is going to infer the type of the load courses observable. If we use here the shortcut Ctrl+Shift+P, we are going to see that using the TypeScript type inference, this load courses variable is already an observable of course array. This means that the rest of our program is type safe. As we can see, this showLoader until completed API is slightly more convenient to use than the previous version that we had here. We don't have to add finalize operators everywhere just to turn off the loading indicator. It's a little bit less verbose, so you have here a more convenient option for adding loading indicator capabilities to your components and services. Let's now see the showLoader until completed functionality in action. We're going to reload our application, and let's keep an eye here, and as we can see, the loading indicator functionality is working correctly as expected. Let's now see how can we apply this loading indicator functionality in other parts of our application.